Welcome back to Fresh Economic Thinking. You're with Cameron Murray. Thank you for all your support. This is the voiceover to the article entitled, "Please Stop Confusing Supply and Density in Housing Debates." Subtitle, "People say they get it, but they don't." This is all one take. Thanks for your support. Let's get to it. A dominant line of thinking in policy land is that allowing higher housing densities increases the rate at which new housing is produced. Few people express it so precisely, but many believe it to be true, and in doing so, they unwittingly conflate the two completely separate concepts of density at a site and the rate of housing production across a market under the single label of supply. Indeed, the less aware they are of the distinction, the more cocksure they are in calling out idiots who don't see the world as they do. After all, it's Econ 101, stupid. But supply is not density. I'm reluctant to use the word supply at all. Supply in its specific and technical economic meaning is not a quantity of existing homes nor a rate of production of new homes. Supply is a concept of market exchange. Think of it as an offer curve at a market exchange, like a exchange for share markets. All the sellers line up with the price they would accept to trade. This is why, with the same stock of homes, you can have a market boom or a market crash, depending on the supply, that is the willingness to sell, and the demand, i.e. the willingness to buy in that period. Saying that a price change is due to supply and demand might sound sophisticated, but it's not an explanation, it's a tautology. The explanation needs to answer the question of why sellers or buyers change their willingness to sell or buy. As Brian Albrecht has explained, supply represents actually the demand from the current owners of a product being traded. While we often think that supply is independent of demand, it really isn't. There's no such thing as independent supply. So I'll do my best to talk about the stock of dwellings, the growth in the stock, or the rate of new housing production, and other specific terms, though it is hard to escape the word supply, and I might just use it at times to mean the rate of new housing production. Now, back to the frustrating topic of confusing density and the rate of new housing production. You'll find an abundance of examples of this in housing debates. Here is an especially clear example from the New South Wales Productivity Commission. They wrote a report asking about how much lower rents would be if all new buildings were denser, but with the effect of assuming that dwellings were built faster. Let me quote from their report. About 1,500 new apartment buildings were built in Sydney between 2017 and 2022. These buildings averaged 7 stories and contained 10 dwellings per story. If instead we had permitted modestly denser development, for example, if apartments had averaged 10 stories instead of 7, then an extra 45,000 homes could have been provided, all without using any extra land and with minimal effect on neighbourhood character. The additional 45,000 units would represent a little over 2% increase in Sydney's private dwelling stock. Typical rules of thumb suggest this extra supply would have lowered apartment prices and rents by 5.5%, all else being equal. In dollar terms, this is a saving of about $35 a week in rent on the median apartment, or about $1,800 a year. For a median income earner, this is equivalent to a 2.75% increase in their real purchasing power, similar to a typical year's wage rise. End quote. Here's a replication of this approach in Vancouver, and there's a link there to a website. And you can see in this plot the counterfactual extra homes marked for the 5 years 2019 to 2023 due to an assumption that more density is a faster rate of new housing production. And there is a chart there showing the yearly rate of new homes developed, and you can see they've literally just added it on each year. So they've assumed that density equals speed. I want to make it very clear here that density and the rate of new housing production per period are different concepts, different dimensions, with different units of measurement. Confusing them is one of the most common problems in the analysis of housing supply in both academia and popular commentary. This section's called, Does This Diagram Help? I'm a visual learner. Maybe this diagram of density and the rate of housing production on a 2-axis chart will help you too. And for the listeners there, across the x-axis I've put the rate of housing production in dwellings per period, and on the y-axis I've got density, dwellings per area, and in each of the quadrants, so each axis is divided up into 2 sections, I've got a little diagram of either low density houses being built slowly in the bottom left, or high density being built slowly in the top left, or I've got high density being built fast in the top right, or I've got low density being built fast in the bottom right. I recommend checking that out. The vertical axis is density, shown here going from 25 dwellings per hectare to 100 per hectare. The horizontal axis is the rate of new housing production, going from 4 per year to 8 per year at each density. Notice the units of measurement are different. Density has the unit dwellings per area, or per project given its fixed area, and the rate of new housing production has the unit dwellings per period. Another way to think about this is that housing comes from many different projects with different densities, and the production rate of homes, this is what we might think of supply being, is the product of projects and densities. Or, for the maths whizzes out there, I've got supply on the left of this equation, which is in the units dwellings per period, and that is equal to the density dwellings per project times projects, which is projects per period. And when we take the units through, we can see that supply is a product, not just of density, but the number of projects in a period. Property owners don't choose a density to maximize their return, but then choose to build so many projects as to minimize it. If the density of a particular project is limited by regulations, rather than otherwise limited by market prices at a particular location, you can adjust the number of projects to meet a rate of production that overall maximizes returns. Notice that being strict about the units here resolves any confusion, and it also shows that since the planning system doesn't constrain the number of projects, we need to understand how that affects supply. Don't projects filter too? The diagram also makes clear that if you, I'm just fixing a typo, the diagram also makes clear that you can have fast, low-density new housing production, which is the bottom right corner, or slow, high-density new housing production, which is the top left corner. So can you see why I find it problematic when I hear things like, we are getting more housing built by upzoning near train stations? Okay, does more mean higher density or a faster rate of housing production? The New South Wales Productivity Commission made this exact conceptual mistake. They assume that the extra dwellings per land area, i.e. higher density, must be delivered within the same time period, and is hence the same as a faster rate of new housing production. They simply assumed that a fixed number of sites are developed each year, and therefore if each was developed to a higher density, more homes would be built each year. But the number of sites developed is a market choice. Sites are not developed as soon as it is feasible. There is undeniable empirical evidence that most sites that can be feasibly developed or sold at a profit are not, and we call this land banking. And for that matter, town planning regulations don't limit the rate of housing production, only the density or use at certain locations. So here's what the New South Wales Productivity Commission did. Instead of shifting vertically on our diagram to higher density but at the same rate of housing production, they effectively shifted diagonally to the right, assuming that a 20% increase in density must result in a 20% increase in the rate of supply. But you don't need more density for a faster rate of supply. You only need to exercise the option to develop out the pool of feasible sites more frequently. I hope this is clear. Please comment if it is not. To recap, density, dwellings per land area, is not the same as the rate of new housing production, which is dwellings per period. Only increasing the second of these and bringing them to market, i.e. increasing the willingness to sell, can affect the overall price level of homes under conditions of constant demand. And there's a footnote there noting again that supply, the willingness to sell, is not independent of demand typically. Remember, town planning rules don't regulate the speed at which housing is developed, only the density. Yet too many people who participate in housing debates cannot differentiate the two. That's all for today. Thanks for listening.